This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you're listening to the Q&A with A.P.C., the show that features conversations with artists, cultural figures, policymakers, performers, and other innovators living in Virginia. Episode 12, Naro Expanded Cinema. The Naro movie theater is one of only 250 single-screen movie theaters remaining in America. For nearly 40 years, my guest, Tench Phillips, and his childhood friend Tom Borlas have steered the art house movie theater through a radically changing media environment. Originally opened in 1936, the theater has survived the advent of television, VHS and DVD rentals, home theaters, the switch from film to digital projection, and online streaming services. In this honest, wide-ranging, and unpredictable conversation, Tench discusses attending college in 1960s America, the early years of the Naro cinema, and suffers through a game of rapid fire. This episode of the Q&A with A.P.C. was recorded at Tench's office next door to the Naro and begins with him in the middle of writing an article on his computer.
So I'll just talk.
Okay, yeah. Do you want? I mean, you can work and talk at the same time. It really won't bother me at all. I won't feel like, if you're not looking at me the whole time or whatever, that's fine because I know you have things to do. Tench Phillips III. What is the origin of the name Tench? I don't think I've ever heard that before.
It's my family name. It is a last name, so I have three family names, last names, and I'm named after my father and grandfather, who were Tench H. Phillips Sr. and Jr. I'm the third, and it's a Southern tradition and a poor one, because what happens is that you expect the eldest son to take after the father, and when he doesn't, you have a lot of baggage, both of you. But now that my dad's still alive, so we have, and he's very different in many ways, and in some ways we're alike. We both carried the name in different ways, even though we share the same name.
Do you have children?
No, and I didn't continue the tradition of either children or naming the first son. And so Dad expected me to be a different way than I actually turned out to be.
So your father and your uncle both owned auto dealerships, which you worked at when you were 13 years old. You washed cars?
Yeah.
Well, was it an Oldsmobile dealership?
It was, yeah.
Did you have an Oldsmobile? Was that your first car, like a Cutlass Supreme or something like that?
Yeah.
That was sort of their flagship, wasn't it?
The Cutlass, yeah. Back in the mid-'60s, the whole culture was about cars, and I had very much of a high profile because of my dad being advertising on TV. His name was my name, and I took, of course, tremendous ribbing from my classmates the next day at school when a new advertisement, bad commercial that my dad and uncle starred in would come out playing. They would play some famous brothers on these really badly produced TV spots, and they were so cheap they could run them all over local TV. There was only 3 networks, and I had to take, in some ways, the brunt of what was a kind of, and I understood it, of being an elitist or someone with money. And so in order to, it was difficult. I had to thread a line between not getting beat up, and although I did, and then also carrying some kind of prestige with other people. And I found that to do that the best, I really had to step out of being, someone who was really kind of private and interested in schoolwork and not, I wasn't particularly athletic or large. I was too small to play football, so I wrestled in high school. But I made good allies in my buddies who were athletes, and I pretty much had to, and I did count on them
to get your back.
And so that's how I got through school, is kind of of having to be smart and having to use my name, which was already being advertised and publicized out there, and using it and trying to subvert it and use it in my own way, because I didn't want to use it as an advertisement to sell something.
And it's Phillips Automotive, which is still around locally here.
No. Finally, my father and my brother went into my father's business, but they sold out a couple years ago. They finally got out, so there is no more Phillips for the first time in many decades.
How does that feel? Is that bittersweet? I mean, you're over.
For me?
Yeah.
I wasn't relating to it emotionally or in any type of way at all, only through them. So I see the problems of being in business with your family. So I'm glad I never did,
right.
Even though it looked very lucrative monetarily to be able to come over to Colley Avenue and establish my own, even in the shadow of a dynasty of businessmen, to create my own business. But the business turned out to be much more of an art form, and it created that voice and the creativity that kept me from really being associated, except through those people who still associated my name with my dad. Now that my dad is, is approaching his late 80s, his generation is gone, and so the name, ironically, is not associated with my father anymore as a businessman, but as me,
right.
a theater owner, and what we've done with the Naro Theater.
You were called the curious one growing up in terms of your family. Your uncle, there was some politics in your family also. Your uncle ran for city council, or was a city councilman.
Yeah, for many years
he was. And ran for state senate in 1978?
He did. He was... one thing about my family that I really would have liked to have distanced myself was their conservative Christian politics. And my father he flirted with politics, but he didn't do it. But Conley, my father's brother, my uncle, did get into politics and was and still is a colleague and friend of Pat Robertson in CBN.
Have you met Pat Robertson?
I have, yeah.
What was that like? Or what is that like?
It was very brief, and there was really no conversation. So it was just one of either at a family party or when we did the CBN or Regent University Film Festival here for quite a few years that we started with Terry Linville back in the late 70s. Each year we would do the student films. We don't do it anymore. They kind of pull things away from public, and they have it on their own campus.
Mm-hmm.
But Pat Robertson would come here, and so sometimes I would just say hi to him. But I knew who he was from, of course, we all did, from watching and what he talked about or reading what he said, and really not wanting to be in any way associated with his politics or with his religion.
Right. I guess for me, you studied Eastern philosophy, which we'll get into. I guess my feeling would be, was there ever sort of a pull for you to want to, after the handshake, just maybe, not in a rude way, but just sort of, go back and forth a little bit philosophically about life and religion with him? Or was it not that kind of opportunity?
I've done that with other people, and now that I'm older, I'm able to do that more. But at the time, I think that because it was not on a political space, it was more either at the Naro where I was the host. I didn't confront him. I have confronted other people who have come here, including Scott Ridgell, who was our congressman, and who showed up here for one of our Wednesday night film events and wanted to speak. And so he was unannounced, and I really got into it with Scott. But again, this was a few years ago, and he was more of my age. And I think there's a difference that we have with age, where people who are older, you show some respect regardless of their politics or where they are. You don't really engage them, where you don't feel that. And that's why now that I'm older, I got to watch myself, because I can be too much of, my wife says, of a know-it-all and too opinionated that I have the right answer for things. And that's what I don't like, of course, with people who are quote-unquote believers, is that they have the truth. Well, then I got to be careful, how do I come off sounding when I am also coming from that same place of having the truth?
What was the issue with Ridgell? Was it oil drilling, would be my guess?
No, it was a film. His children were here, his grown kids, who were interested in, it was agriculture and relocalization of farms and produce and farm markets, and talked about agriculture, agribusiness.
Yes.
And what I differed with him was that he took the message of the film and twisted it that we don't need regulation, and look what this was doing to the family farm. Well, yeah, but it's a type of regulation. It's not a blanket statement, and I had to correct him that we did not want his libertarian views, our audience or myself, about corporations not being regulated, especially environmentally, whether it was Monsanto or the big agribusinesses. And he is confused about that. He feels like get government out of business and then let them do what they want. Well, that's we know from documented evidence now what that does over the last decades when you let these corporations run rampant. Yeah, I can understand the problems of regulation too much of the family farm, and the movie showed that also. But he had to be set straight, and I was the only one to do it at that, so I couldn't. Usually I like to be a host with equanimity in these programs, to not give too much of my own opinion. But in that case, there was no one else to do it, so I had to take Scott on.
Well, that's right, and we appreciate that. It is your house, after all, You were studying engineering at Georgia Tech in 1969 during the Vietnam War, and your birth date was drawn early, and you were dealt a low draft number.
Yeah, it was the first lottery that happened.
Do you remember your draft number?
42, I believe.
There it is. If you weren't at the university, what would you have done?
I didn't have a political sense at the time. What my influence was from adults was that to be a man, you would join the military service and learn everything. And so many of my classmates had joined ROTC. And I was, of course, advised to do the same thing, but I had been learning about Vietnam, and I was living in Atlanta in an urban area, and in Piedmont Park on the weekends, the vets would come, and even though it was the South, it was real different in Atlanta than the rest of the South in the late 60s, early 70s. And I would meet and talk to some of these vets, and they would show up at some of the free Allman Brothers concerts in Piedmont Park, and I would ask them, what was happening really over there? And they told me that we were being lied to by our government and by the media, and that and some stories were really what was going on. It was very dark. And I realized that I gained, because I had to, a political sense with a low draft number. And so that changed me, because my family wondered how I had changed when I got down to Georgia Tech and came back really different, grew my hair long, became a hippie. Well, of course, it was the cannabis I was smoking and then the initial drug taking that I was doing. But it was also this political sense that I was gaining an awareness of what was happening in Vietnam. So all that together would infuse the fact that I would not be drafted, and I would not go over to Vietnam. So fortunately, by the time I got out in '73, or the end of '72 from Georgia Tech, and it kept me in school to get the degree, I realized that the war was winding down, and I did something I did some kind of legal maneuver,
Right.
so I didn't have to leave the country. Although I was prepared to do that if I had to.
But it probably also turns you on to the manipulation of the government and people, elected officials, and also the role of the media involved, which sort of, still continues in your work to this day.
That's right. And so nothing's changed. I thought that actually things would change because those of us who were taking on the responsibilities of bringing in political, environmental truths, women's rights, minority rights that were happening in the '60s, which has now been vilified by the right, what we were doing back then and in the '70s. The movies and the media that was coming out then were very much against Vietnam and the military. And I remember that when I came back to Norfolk, that the military people did not want to wear their uniforms around in Norfolk because there was a real mindset just among normal, ordinary young people against the military. Well, what happened was something that I didn't expect and had never envisioned. I thought that we would, because our media and again the cultural stories being told, that we would not be going into war anymore that was fabricated on lies and that was oppressive and needlessly killing so many people. Well, I didn't understand and couldn't envision the right-wing response to what was going on in the '60s under Nixon, and that everything from the war on drugs happened under Nixon to the type of infiltration by the FBI and the CIA of the type of student revolts, and then the type of militarization of the police against protesters that really have created today a much more authoritarian right-wing statist society that we live in, that it loves the military, loves war, that doesn't question our Pentagon, but will question other aspects of a government that is said to be too large. So that I have my mission here at the Naro, too, as you can tell by that statement I just made.
Is it difficult or frustrating living in an area that's so closely aligned to the defense industry with 17 military bases and the jet planes flying and the I Love Jet Noise bumper stickers and Northrop Grumman? Is that difficult and frustrating?
Well, it is for all of us, isn't it? And who are free thinkers. But yet, what we have to do is say we're here for it's not any accident that we're here. Somehow we're here. And so then this is the place that we have to work. And when I find that people do come here from out of town, like speakers, Amy Goodman with Democracy Now! Has been here twice at the Naro to speak and is talking about coming down again in the fall. Well, these are people who see the importance of having a progressive media and voice in such a military-industrial complex that, that's kind of a cul-de-sac and forgotten, especially compared to Washington.
Yes.
But it's so huge here that, at my old age now, I realize more my destiny and my mission. And so, no, I get pissed off but I don't look and listen to as much news as I used to, and I suffer fools lightly. I don't talk to people who are going to not change their position, and you kind of know now when you talk to people, very quickly what media they're consuming and by what real view they have. And I don't try to convince or convert anybody. The audiences that come here on Wednesday night are already converted for the most part. So
Right.
I'm just like, these are my allies and kindred spirits. I'm just trying to make them to cause, raise media literacy for all of us and to have a good time.
In 1971, there was a book that came out called Be Here Now. Can you talk about that book and the influence it had on you? It's kind of going back in time a little bit.
Somebody gave it to me when I was traveling through Europe for about 6 months in '73. And that's why I read it in a sleeping bag in the coldest winter in Crete, Greece, where it was snowing, and I couldn't get out during the day. I had to stay in my sleeping bag. There's no heat anywhere. So as far I read Be Here Now within a matter of a week, and it just changed my perception of the world completely. I'd never been exposed to philosophy, even Western philosophy. I had a very pragmatic utilitarian education, engineering school.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have Western philosophy or Eastern philosophy to fall back on. So this sent me in the direction of Eastern philosophy, and I just got into Western philosophy over the last 10 years. And then Ram Dass, who was Richard Alpert, changed his name, who was part of the Richard Schulte's Harvard School connection with the plants that he was bringing up from the Amazon for changing consciousness. Ram Dass was part of that with Timothy Leary in Boston. And then he went in this direction after going to India and finding his guru. He was affecting a lot of us with his writings, starting with Be Here Now, and going around speaking. He came to Virginia Beach and he spoke at the New Age Yoga Center. Mm-hmm. And that was the next year I went off to Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, to try to find what he was doing. As it turned out, he wasn't out there. He had moved on. He was only there for a while because it was a Buddhist school where he was from the Hindu tradition. Mm-hmm. The Rinpoche who I studied with was Chogyam Trungpa, who was Tibetan and had migrated here when the Chinese took over Tibet. So that was a very different scene, but it also was eclectic, and it brought in poets and literature people, and especially in the summer. So I was very much in the mid-'70s lucky to be at the right place at the right time again.
And that book kind of lit a fire at that cold night in Crete,
did.
Which was probably just what you needed.
Yeah, I did after an engineering degree.
You took a course while you were in Boulder, Colorado with Allen Ginsberg. Did you hang out with him outside of the classroom at all?
Very briefly. I mean, he had I was still too young and green and didn't have the writer's creative thinking yet. I was still coming out of engineering.
How was his class?
Well, he kept it lively, and he pretty much monopolized the conversation. There was very little Q&A. Mm-hmm. He had a lot to say. It was getting, he was getting older at the time, and I think he knew his health was only so well. And he really wanted to make this transmission of culture, of knowledge, of a wisdom tradition that he had with so many people being in the 60s and 70s. He was connected just about every writer and prophet in the country.
Yeah.
And he brought that to the class, and just huge storytelling, and then reading of poetry of those who he William Carlos Williams, and a bit of his own poetry.
Did you like James Franco's How?
I thought that I liked it, and I didn't like it, both.
Yeah. You returned to Virginia and to Norfolk and saw potential in the Naro movie theater. What was the cultural scene like in Tidewater, Virginia in the late 1970s?
Well, in some ways, maybe not that different than it is now, and in other ways, very different. I didn't pay too much attention to what was going on in the suburbs, and I was lucky to find this apartment with my still business partner after in almost 40 years, Tom Vorlis, and so we moved in together, and we're a block away from the Naro. And so when it became available, we came down here, and we had around us in Ghent a lot of actors and creative people, musicians, and who were about our age. And we were having a good time, you know, the guys and girls. And, it seems like we went through each other's girlfriends and,
What were the places where people would hang out? Would it be a house? Would it be bars and restaurants?
Yeah, it was houses. There was no restaurants. There was only bars, was Kogan's. And, there may be a few others, and then Kelly's and Intermission, but that was it. Things weren't monetized quite yet. Even fast foods weren't real big, and so you had to still make up things on your own without social networking and the internet, and also the fact that you didn't have such creative cafes and places to go to hang out. Maybe in New York City, but not here. They just weren't here.
What was the scene like on Granby Street at the time?
I don't even remember. I never would go down there.
As you mentioned, your childhood friend Tom, and you took over the theater in September of 1977. What condition was the theater in, and what was it being used for?
It was the Actors Theater, which was a stage company. A board of directors had gotten together and for about 2 years rented the theater, built a stage, and put on several plays a year. It was amateur, and but some really good, very professional type of creative playwrights and actors and directors.
Did you act?
No, I never. No.
Did Tom act?
Neither one of us did. We had plenty of friends who did, but I think that that wasn't either of our calling.
So it was a live theater venue.
It was, and we saw, and would come down here and with our friends, and then we, after seeing a couple Ingmar Bergman films up in a double feature in New York City, when we went up there, we would go up to the city, and it was The Seventh Seal and The Virgin Spring, and that just changed my perspective of what film could be, and those are the type of films that weren't being showed. So we rented the theater out, and we did that poster on the wall of those first 7 films of the Ingmar Bergman in the mid-'70s, and that's how we got our start, by renting the theater from the Actors Theater and eventually getting a lease on the theater ourselves.
How did you meet Tom? I know he was your childhood friend. Do you remember the first time you ever saw him or hung out with him? Was it on a bike or was it on the corner? Do you remember?
No, I know exactly where it was. It was in geometry class, and we were in 8th grade together. And he sat behind me in the row of desks, and he said something about, it was just something stupid, and I turned around and I fell for what he said. But that we were from that point on, and we didn't live very far from each other, so we were not close friends because we had different interests. And he's Greek and was raised in the Greek Orthodox Church, so he had very strong pack mentality with his Greek friends, but we went in different directions at college, and then again when we got back we rendezvoused again, but we always stayed in touch together. And when I was in Europe, he would send me blotter acid. He kept me.
Nice.
Yeah, Tom was someone who, talk about a kindred spirit, that we've, what a fortunate relationship that we've been able to work together without, fighting and totally going, calling it off.
Right.
It's like a marriage.
You guys had your first beer together?
Probably
first cigarette?
First acid test, I think, was probably more what it was.
We're going to do a segment that we haven't really done before on the show, called Rapid Fire, and I'm just going to name some things, and you tell me which one you'd prefer, all right?
Well, I know I can't do rapid fire.
All
I'm in slow
No, you
right
got it.
now.
No, you're doing great. Popcorn or Twizzlers?
You mean this is all A, B?
Mostly, yeah.
And I don't have to give you a justification?
No, you can just say one and
Popcorn.
answer. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Meditation or yoga?
Yoga.
Chevy or Ford?
Neither.
Chocolate, strawberry, or vanilla?
Strawberry.
The beach or the mountains?
The beach.
Magic mushrooms or marijuana?
Marijuana.
Drums or guitar?
Drums.
Ballet or opera?
Opera.
Beer or wine?
Beer.
Pulp Fiction or Magnolia?
Pulp Fiction or Magnolia? Pulp Fiction.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek.
Nanook of the North or Roger and Me?
Roger and Me.
George Clooney or Brad Pitt? You look like you are in agony right now. I'm so sorry about
You've
this.
brought me into a rabbit hole here and then left me falling over a cliff. What kind of choice is that? Why do I have to do that? I'll incriminate myself by answering that question.
Okay, we'll skip that one. Meryl Streep or Daniel Day-Lewis?
Daniel Day-Lewis.
Easy Rider or American Graffiti?
Easy Rider.
Are you doing okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Alien or Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
Alien.
Raging Bull or Taxi Driver?
Taxi Driver.
Stand By Me or The Breakfast Club?
Stand By Me.
Apocalypse Now or The Godfather?
Apocalypse Now.
Ghostbusters or E.T.?
Ghostbusters.
The Princess Bride or Groundhog Day?
Groundhog Day.
The Big Lebowski or Fargo?
Big Lebowski.
What's the first movie you saw?
As a kid?
Yeah.
I'm sure it was a Disney film, but I don't. It's hard because I really was watching TV more than going to movies as a little kid, so I don't know what it was.
What's the last movie you saw?
Well, last night I was watching The Embrace of the Serpent, but I didn't see the whole thing. I'm going to see the rest of it tonight.
What's the worst movie ever played at the Naro?
Well, we had a couple of movies that were supposed to be bad, and
What, like Snakes on a Plane kind of thing?
Yeah, and we marketed them as being terrible movies. I mean, this was back in the '80s when you could get away with things like this. But I can't. For some reason, the names escape me. They're not memorable.
All right, this is a good one. During a movie, when someone needs to get by you to go to the bathroom, is it better to stand up or just move your knees?
Depends how much space you have in the aisle. I do both.
You're at the movies and someone is talking behind you. What do you do?
Well, in my theater, I tell them they either get thrown out or they have to be quiet. If it's another theater, I'll move.
Sorry. What's the best seat in the Naro?
Back for me and Angela, we choose, and it's usually her liking, is back, rear, right side.
On the bottom?
Yeah.
How many pumps of butter should I put on my popcorn?
None, because it's not butter.
Complete this sentence. The biggest celebrity to see a movie at the Naro was?
Tom Hanks.
He was in town for Captain Phillips recently. Was that?
No, not recently, but yeah.
Well, fairly recent. That's
and he's
4 years
on my
ago.
mind because his new movie opens Friday.
Complete this sentence. Movie trailers are?
I was thinking about Tom Hanks. Wait a minute, let me switch gears. Movie trailers are misnamed.
What do you mean?
Because they come before a movie and they're called trailers.
Okay. In 39 years, the estimated number of films shown at the Naro is?
The total?
Total.
Well, I guess I would go over to the video store, and they have a deep catalog of 40,000 titles. And I would say, when I look on the shelves, half of them look like we've played them. So I'll say 20,000.
That's a great answer. This is the last one. Thank you for playing Rapid Fire. The before film music at the Naro Movie Theater is sponsored by Birdland Music. If you were to buy a few records from Birdland Music tonight, what would you buy?
I would buy what I already have behind me, which I've been listening to the best CDs of this past year. And Tom makes his annual best of with one cut from each of the best albums, and so I would probably just play his CDs. The top one is a Van Morrison duet.
Okay.
But Destroyer is one I really like. I just listened to that yesterday.
Okay, that was good. The movie theater was built in 1936 and was originally called the Collie, named after the street it's on, Collie Avenue. What kind of scene would you find at night at the Collie Theater on a Friday, Saturday night before you owned it?
There wasn't anyone up here. There was nobody out. There was nobody on the streets.
The Collie was renamed the Naro when Robert Levine took ownership of the theater in the 1960s. He named it after his parents. Who was Robert Levine, and what was he like? Did you ever...
I only met him once at a city council meeting when we were trying to get the council to give us the permit to go into business and operate the Naro back in '77, and he was there. And I think by then he must have had dementia or something, because he stood up and said some real off-the-wall things that the council couldn't even take in. By that time, he had lost all of his movie theaters. He had owned all the single screens around here, the Rosna, the Memrose, and the Rosalie, and that's a whole story that I really, we all need to hear from his son, Nathan, what happened to his empire. I know that he lost in foreclosure to the Stein family that owns the Naro Theater now, and who is the estate that Tom and I rent the Naro from, and he lost it all in a very short time, in the early '60s to mid '70s. Again, I don't know what happened, except TV and technology change happened to him, and then the multi-screen complex of AMC came at Military Circle. But that still doesn't really explain or justify what happened to that empire of Levine's theaters.
In 1977, what were some of the first things that you did cosmetically and otherwise to the theater when you took over, when you and Tom took over?
We did as little as possible as far as just mainly painting and plastering, but try not to spend a lot of money. We had a lot of our friends who jumped in and came up here and wanted to be part of our project, who would work for free. I think we had volunteers for the first year of people working behind concession and taking tickets. We had such a, as young people, we were 27, and we had this camaraderie. So we had all the support in the world from everyone, until we made a go of it ourselves and showed that there was a business model here for art films and Bergman films and esoteric films, that it actually could fly in Norfolk, because we were told going into the business that it would not work in this town, what we were trying to do. But we started as a hobby, and we didn't really, we wanted to make an income, but we would have done it even if we were not able to make it for a few years. But very soon afterwards, things started taking off for us. We're very fortunate, again, to be in the right place at the right time.
If we were to walk next door right now, are there parts of the theater that have remained unchanged since 1936?
Maybe in the back storage rooms, yeah.
What is the process for deciding what films are shown and how long to show them for?
Whoa, that's a long answer to a short question, Andrew. I don't.
Well, let me ask this: how do you get the rights to show older films?
Well, all of these films, except the ones that are in the public domain, have copyrights, and you have to research through who owns the rights to the film. Usually, it's not too hard to do, but libraries are bought and sold now, these classics, and as a group, and so some of them are lost, and they aren't. No one really knows who has the rights for some of the older films. The bigger classics, of course, do have rights, but you have to just do your research on the web and come up with the distributor who owns the rights to them. So then you make a deal with the distributor about what the percentage of the door would be and what kind of guarantee you would put up front to be able to get the film, and then what medium you want the film in. Do you want it in the 35 millimeter? Because we still have our projectors. We didn't take them out, even though we went to digital over 2 years ago. We have not used them hardly at all, though. We find that the prints are in so-so condition, and that the audience acceptance of digital has been so good that no one seems to notice or care that it's all digital now. That as long as the quality presentation, what it is, it's better. It looks better. There's more light on the screen than and there's less flicker than our film. So as it was, and as much as we fought it for years of having to go digital, now that it's been done, we do all in digital, and we just make and that's what we book, and we just, whether it's a classic or a new film, we deal with many different small distributors now to make a deal. It's kind of like buying a used car, of what we're willing to pay for a film and what the percentage is, and then what the distributor takes and what we get from the box office. Because we don't get any funding. We're a for business. We're not a nonprofit. We don't get any funding. The box office has to make it, and that is hard for some of our audience to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Why we make some of our decisions, and sometimes we look like we've gone commercial. And dealing and playing a bigger film that the quality is only so good, but the audience is there for it, and unfortunately, the audience is not has become older like me. And they're not discretionary. So if it's an older film that stars Maggie Smith or some of the older actresses, and it's a story that appeals to older women, middle-aged to older, that's the film that Naro does well in. So we have to play those films longer. And then the type of art films that I really like are the one-off, single screen, single showing. And we explain that because we don't have funding for this, we got to play the films that the box office and market bears, and that's the films like Lady in the Van, and tomorrow, Friday, we open up Hello, My Name is Doris with Sally Fields. These are films that our narrow audience that grew up with us likes. I hope that one day that the youth market finds art films, so we're trying to do that.
And sometimes the film distributors tell you how long you can show the film for. For example, Birdman, which was a film that I liked, there was a certain length of time that whichever distributor or studio had it, I don't know off the top of my head, told you in order to play it, you had to run it for, was it 2 weeks? Something like that?
Yeah, there's minimums when it's a bigger art film, and especially when it's around Academy Award time, where they're getting the award recognition at the end of the year. That's become a problem, actually, because not only, to answer your question, yes, we have to play it clean a lot of times, where if it's Fox Searchlight or Weinstein distributors, they say, you can't play it unless you play at all shows. Well, that's fine for a multi-screen complex. They can play all shows all the time, Birdman or whatever the film is.
You mean
for us.
Like it's the 12 o'clock, the 4 o'clock, the 7 o'clock?
Yeah, all the shows.
The whole day.
Yeah, we can't play another film on top of it. And that's what we do almost all the time is a single screen. That's the only economic business model that makes sense for us. But we sometimes, in order to get the film, and especially if it's going to be exclusive and not go wide and play all over town, we'll say, okay, we'll play it for a while, and we will only play that one film. Luckily, there's less majors that have that clout, although a lot of times we operate in a gray area, and it's like don't ask, don't tell. If the distributor doesn't say or dictate to us that we have to play it clean, they might just think that, then we don't, because it just doesn't make sense for us as a single screen.
Are there movie studios or distributors who have been better to work with than others? I know the logos, and obviously there's certain studios. Are there ones that are better so that when
but the big corporate boys are owned by the 6 large multimedia transnational companies. So you've got 6 media companies who own and operate 90% of what we consume in the way of entertainment and the news in this country.
Is Weinstein under?
Weinstein actually
is one of the
is not a. They spun off from Disney, and the Weinstein brothers bought themselves out, I guess,
because Miramax was part
characterize it. Yeah. And so Disney kept Miramax, and the Weinsteins went off and formed their own company. They've had their problems, but they've tried to compete in the art market, and with mixed results so far. But they are also hard to deal with. But they are not a major. There's only 6 majors. They're kind of a mini major, and there's quite a few of those. But thankfully, because of the platform shift to the web that has just thrown for all media companies, regardless who they are, newspapers, bookstores, movies, music, we have seen that a lot of the big boys gave up on art films, and so what happened to fill the vacuum is these small mom and pop distributors came up and sprung up among the dinosaurs, and these little mammals scurrying around have brought in all this, gathered these films together, because some more films are being made than ever by independent filmmakers and cheap digital equipment. The budgets shrank, so everyone can make movies. It's just how do you get your audience to see what you made as a movie. So we are dealing with smaller distributors, and that makes it easier for us. They can't be as big of bullies and dictate to us what the terms are, even that we have to play a film clean. And the only problem is still the big movies are coming out in the late fall, and for the Academy Award nominations
season.
And because of that, the rest of the year, we're kind of seeing, and we're making the compromise, the adjustments, that we may only make business money here at the Naro 7 months out of the year, and that's November through March, and then July, August. And the rest of the months, those 5 months, boy, if we can break even, that will be good, because the movies aren't out there. They're keeping the quality movies at a particular time of year. Well, they're strangling exhibitors, art screens around the country. Most of them have gone nonprofit. They're not like the Naro. There's hardly any single screens anymore, and the ones that are there have become funded, by arts organizations, and we pride ourselves to be able to hang in there and have our market. We're very lucky, though. It's more than our skill and intelligence. We've been very lucky to be here in Norfolk.
Do you feel supported by the elected leaders of the city?
I don't even bother with them, and they don't bother with us. It's so funny how out of touch we are. The establishment in this city, when I said that the audience for our movies are older, yes, it's true, but it's not the older establishment players, the political players in this city. They stay away from the Naro, especially from the serious documentaries and the social issues that we present here on Wednesday nights. We don't get city people. We don't get the city staff, and we don't get the politicians to come down here to Colley Avenue.
Do they not recognize the worth, financial and otherwise, of having the movie theater here?
Yeah, I can't tell you that. I don't know.
Talk about the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
I'd rather not.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. It's been really a terrific 38-year run. And we're very fortunate to be able to do it. And it comes and goes, at times it doesn't play it twice a month. And it's in a down cycle. And you think it's probably played out by now. It should have been a long time ago. But then because of the cast and live show part, that they can draw the young kids in again. And there's always a new generation of young kids who want to come see it.
And dress up?
Yeah. And so it's been a liberating. I think that the next kick will be a documentary that was actually filmed here in Norfolk just a couple years ago, and in the other long-running theaters who have been playing Rocky for so long. Like we're one of the oldest in the country of the longevity of Rocky Horror, and that movie is called. I think the title is Rocky Horror Changed My Life.
Okay.
And that. When that comes out, we'll play that, and it will be another boost for the Rocky.
What have been some of the most popular movies shown in your 39 years
I
of ownership?
have no memory. I can't tell you what that is. Tom is somebody who would be good to ask questions like that of, because he does have a good memory, and that's he likes statistics and keeping records, as a bookkeeper and all.
Right.
So, but he's pretty damn creative. He kind of could he'll know and say where I can't tell you if you ask me what my favorite movies are or what has done best here, what's made a difference. If I write, and that's one of the good things from writing my monthly Veer column, is if I actually sit down, do the research, and think and write, then those things that are not easily accessible to me in just oral tradition, I'm able to write it out and come back for my next column, and I'll let you know what the answer to that.
Tench, again, thank you for coming on the show. It means a lot to me for you to come on, and thanks for all the things that you've been doing for the community the past 39 years.
Thank you. I have gratitude to be able to continue to run and operate the Naro for a little bit longer period of time. I'm a lucky guy.
This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you've been listening to the Q&A with A.P.C. To hear archived episodes, go to soundcloud.com/QAAPC or subscribe to the show on iTunes. For exclusive content, including upcoming shows, behind-the-scenes pictures, and more, follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at QAAPC. The executive producer of the Q&A with A.P.C. is Ben Riley. The music was arranged by Soup.